All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Nora Dunlap. I'm the program officer for the MAT Access Point Project and the Center. I just want to quickly welcome everyone and thank you for joining us today. As a reminder, for those of you who might be new to this webinar series, the MAT Access Point Project aims to create a network of organizations throughout California to address the opioid crisis by supporting everything from prevention, education, stigma reduction, all the way through treatment and recovery services for people with opioid use disorder and substance use disorder. And also, very importantly, by increasing access to medication-assisted treatment. So throughout the project period, we've offered several technical assistance webinars for partners to access as resources. This is the final of a 5-part webinar series that has focused on communications and practical skills to implement a communication strategy for organization. Additionally, as a reminder, Change Consulting, who's facilitating this webinar series, will also be providing open office hours or drop-in sessions where you can come get one-on-one or small group support for implementing the learnings and tools shared throughout these webinars. And the last one is scheduled for next Thursday, August 20th at 11 a.m. So this exact same time next week, Thursday. And I'll send out an email to everyone who was registered with the link to join those office hours. Feel free to share that with staff as appropriate as well. One more reminder that this webinar is being recorded and we will post it along with the slides on the website. All of the TA webinars and previous webinars can be found on the website for you to access as a resource and for reference and to share again with staff as appropriate. That being said, it is truly a privilege for the Center and specifically the MAT Access Point Project to sponsor this webinar on mastering the basics of media relations, where we're going to map everything we've learned about communication strategy onto how to win earned media to advance your cause and reach your goals. And with that, I would like to again introduce and welcome Meredith Fenton with Change Consulting. Meredith has been working in and with nonprofit organizations her entire career. As a strategist with Change Consulting team, an independent consultant based in Oakland, she provides coaching, training, and partnership to progressive organizations and leaders so that our movements can better leverage the tools of communication for social change. And with that, Meredith, welcome, and I turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And both welcome back to some familiar faces and names I see on the Zoom today, and welcome to any folks who this is your first webinar joining us of this series. Would love to just get a sense of the amazing folks and communities we have represented on the call today. And so would love to invite folks to just share your name, your pronouns in your organization, and where you're joining us from today. And then if one comes to mind, would love to hear a little bit about where do you go to get your news? And as a bonus, if there's a particular reporter or journalist who you follow, whether it's for your work or whether it's in the rest of your life, we'd love for folks to share that as well. And while folks are doing that, just thank you, Nora, for the introduction. Like she said, my name is Meredith and I'm based in Oakland. I use she and her or them and they pronouns. And today I'm here with the Change team, and my colleagues Anna is definitely on the line, and I think Dina might be joining us as well. And Anna and I will be both presenting today, as well as Anna will be in the chat box helping answer questions there, and feel free to use that chat as part of the conversation, because we know that, like in all of these sessions, you are bringing your own sort of experiences and tools and tips, and we'd love to use the chat box as the best way to collect those along the way. Yeah, please go ahead and welcome John, welcome Anna, welcome Liz. And keep sharing some of the ways that you get your news. I'll share, for me, part of my sort of daily news diet is that every morning when I wake up, I listen to the Up First podcast from NPR. It's about a 15-minute sort of news headlines show. And because it's produced on the East Coast, I feel like it's usually a pretty good way on the West Coast to get caught up on Like, what do I need to know for the context of my day to understand like what I'm walking into? So that's one of my go-to news outlets. So what are we going to do today? We want to talk about 3 things on our agenda. So one is sort of placing media and traditional media into sort of the framework we've been talking about your communication strategy. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the systems and pieces and tools you can put into place in your organization to help build a foundation that can help you do whatever it is that you want to do with the media. And then third, we'll talk about how to, once you have that strategy and you've built that foundation, how to start earning coverage. We'll have some time for questions. And then at the end, since this is our last webinar and we have our last office hours, we'll just review a little bit about what will be happening as we close out this work together. And again, like I said, along the way, please chat any questions, any comments, any ideas into the chat box. And I welcome you all to be on video, even if there's cats or kids in the background, because I like seeing your faces, but also feel free to opt in or out of video as makes best sense for you today. So with that, so what do we even mean when we talk about earned media? So this sort of, these bubbles show you different kinds of media, right? There's the media that you own, the stuff that you're creating yourself. So that might be something like your website, or if you have a blog, right? The kinds of things that you have a lot of ownership on to create yourself. Then there's sort of the shared media, where a lot of the content is stuff that you own, but part of how it's getting out into the world is because you're relying on other voices, right, to spread the word. So those are things like Facebook. Those are things like where someone who has had a great experience at your clinic starts telling their friends, sort of word of mouth referrals. Then there's paid media, right? Which is exactly what it sounds like. You have spent some money to get it. So that might be ads, that might be content that you're paying for online or in a newspaper, but it's that you're paying it for. And then the earned media, which is what we'll spend our time talking about today, is any kind of coverage or amplification or sort of a spotlight on your work that you get by getting other people to talk about you. So that's media relations. That might be getting blogs to write about you. In this day and age, it's sort of the idea of influencers. So if you can get someone who's on Instagram with a ton of followers to hand you over their channel, any of that is what we consider earned media, because you are generating it through cultivating relationships with folks who represent these different kinds of media and news outlets. Sorry about that. So when we're talking about earned media, like always, and this will be familiar to those who've participated in past sessions, we always want to start with our goal. We want to ask ourselves, what is it we're trying to accomplish? Are we trying to raise a certain amount of money? Are we trying to get a certain amount of folks to sign up for our support groups? Are we trying to change a policy? Are we trying to do what, right? But what is the specific thing you want to do? And most of the time, get in the newspaper is probably not your goal, right? That is just a way of achieving some larger goal. There's a reason you want to get in the newspaper. So get really, really clear on what it is you're trying to do. And then we ask ourselves, who do we need in order to achieve this goal? Who are the people that are going to give me the money? Who are the folks that could benefit from the support group I'm offering? Who are the leaders who would vote yes or no on this policy, right? So who are the specific people that you need? And then everything about communication strategy, whether we're talking digital or earned media or messaging or storytelling, is about targeting your audience in the places and with the content that will cue them to be able to do the thing that helps you achieve your goal, right? And so again, media in and of itself isn't necessarily your audience, but they are the path through which you get in front of your audience, who are those voters or donors or client patients. And so what you want to be thinking about is how can earned media be part of targeting your audience, those people that you need? So is this an audience who gets their news from traditional media? And there's lots and lots of online places to do research about different trends for different audiences in terms of where they get their news. For example, we know that the nightly local news skews to an older audience, whereas younger folks often are relying on social media outlets and or more newer types of tech-driven outlets to get their news, right? But again, there's lots and lots of places, and we'll share some links when we follow up for different databases where you can look up by age, by demographic, by language, by location, what are some of these different trends around the ways that folks use the media. Then you also want to think about, do I have something that's newsworthy? And we'll talk about that more in a minute. Because even if you think, okay, the media is a great way to connect with my audiences, you want to make sure that what you have is going to actually generate some news coverage. You also want to be real with yourself about capacity, because both the cultivation of the relationships to get the media, but then also responding to those interview requests, it takes time, and it takes having people who are ready as spokespeople to speak with the media. So you want to make sure that that is all in place as well. And then you also just want to really think and do a bit of an opportunity and risk assessment of how will media coverage help achieve my goals, but also ask, is there any risks where media coverage could hinder them? So for example, I've worked on policy campaigns where we actually felt like just having this be sort of an inside baseball, Sacramento, we're gonna move this bill without actually being public about it was the best way to get something passed. Because there was concern that if it did end up in the newspaper and it caused a big public conversation, that politicians could lose the will to sort of move on a really important piece of policy. So you always want to just sort of think through, right? How can this help me, or how can it hinder me? And then Anna, do you want to share a little bit more about how do we think about whether something we have is newsworthy?
Yeah, absolutely. Because as I'm even seeing in the chat, folks are sharing that, you know, capacity really is an issue, particularly for busy organizations that, you know, are busy like solving problems and supporting people in real time. You know, it's not enough to just do the press, right? Send the press release, et cetera, et cetera. You have to make sure that what you have to offer is actually something that reporters are going to want to respond to. Otherwise, it's probably not a good use of your time. There are other ways, and I believe we'll talk about this. You know, there's other ways, you know, when you looked at those quadrants, right? You can look at, you know, beefing up your social media. You can look at other ways to get the word out. So before we dive into earned media and sending an announcement out, we want to make sure that it passes the newsworthy test. And, you know, this is a big list, right? So this doesn't necessarily mean that what you have to say achieves all of these goals, but I would say it should at least hit 3, for example. So, you know, timeliness, particularly in this unbelievably rapid news cycle, is really a hard thing to achieve sometimes, you know. But it is important. We want to make sure that what we have to say is timely. And it's presenting new information, right? So you're saying something that hasn't been said before, or you're creating a new, you know, putting a new spin to information that maybe is out into the world. Zoom just did this weird thing where I lost.
It's coming back. Something happened with me, but I am coming back right now.
I lost my notes. Okay, there we go. It's always good if we can include a well-known figure, right? So is something you have to say related to a newsmaker, a public figure, a celebrity, something like that. Notoriety definitely helps in getting the word out. You know, there's the whole like man bites dog quip, which is essentially something unusual, a different perspective, something that you have to say that's maybe counterintuitive can really help get the media's attention. Particularly in the work you all are doing, human interest is a big angle to really focus on, you know, telling the stories of real people and really pulling at folks' heartstrings is a great way to get earned media attention. Visuals is also really important. And I know that's challenging in our current environment, but, you know, as much as possible, think about investing, right? If you are going to have an event that has a good photo opportunity, invest in a professional photographer. Get photos and video footage that is high quality that you can use at another time. Any type of event that's happening, you know, for example, right now we're doing a lot of pitching around back to school, right? So back to school during a pandemic. So that is something you can always do is tie, and we're going to be talking about hooks as well. So we're going to go back to this idea of newsworthiness, but we did want to include this checklist as a resource to you all, because you'll get this deck, and this is actually something you can keep handy and go down this list and make sure you have at least 3 to 5 of these things before you reach out to the media.
Great, thank you, Anna. And so again, just, you know, thinking about some of the reasons why media would be strategic on top of once you've decided that you have something newsworthy, right, is because you have decided that media can help you influence the people that you need to influence, or the way that the media is covering an issue is really missing your analysis and framework, and you want to push the narrative and shift the narrative. The media can be really effective for advocacy, right? Building pressure to win something in your community. Is also a great way to sort of position you and your people as thought leaders. If you're seen as sort of the go-to resource in a community, right? Those are all great reasons to pursue media as part of your strategy. But in general, on the right side are just some of the reasons people sometimes think the media is going to be really important. It's just like, oh, well, we think somehow media coverage, just coverage for the sake of coverage is probably not worth your capacity, right? Also for fundraising, there is a way that we've heard that sometimes people get pressure from their funders, like, oh, we'd love to see a story about you in the New York Times. Everybody would love to see a story about themselves in the New York Times, right? But is it really strategic for you to go after that when it's a bit of a unicorn, right? And there is a way that if you get that, or an incredible feature about your work in your local paper, it could lead to some folks wanting to invest in your work. But as a part of a fundraising strategy, it's sort of a secondary effect from media that sometimes it helps raise funds. It's not necessarily the best way to pursue new funds. So then, as you start to think, okay, I'm going to pursue media, how do you narrow it down, right? So again, go back to who is it you're trying to reach? What are the outlets that your people read? What are the kinds of things that you have to offer the media? If you have a bunch of visuals, right, you can pitch more visual types of media. Whereas if what you have is more great stories to tell, or that could be more audio, right, then you might be pitching radio or podcasts. And then you want to think a little bit about how will media and any coverage that you get fit into the other elements of what you're doing, right? That might be your digital storytelling. It may be your materials that you're using to promote out in the world. How do all of those things fit together, right? And so just as a bit of a case study, Anna's going to walk us through one project that Change recently worked on to get media coverage for race counts.
Yeah, so we wanted to lift up race counts because race counts is an example of a resource that we wanted journalists to be able to use in their reporting. So race counts, which is an initiative of the Advancement Project California, is a data bank. Essentially, it's a data bank where they're tracking how well our municipal governments are doing on racial justice. So the way we wanted to get the word out about this initiative and actually get some traction beyond just saying, hey, here's a database for you to use as you're doing your reporting, is to take a more surgical approach. And this is particularly good for those of you who mentioned capacity concerns, right? So instead of feeling like you have to blast something out to a big list, sometimes it's more strategic to actually get really picky about who you're reaching out to. And so in this situation, we offered embargoed, which is essentially means like, hey, embargoed exclusives, right? So embargoed means like, we're going to tell you this thing before we actually announce it publicly. So you give the reporters some time to chew on it and decide if it's a story that they want to run with. And then an exclusive means that, hey, we're going to give you access that no one else is going to get. You're going to get first access. And if you think about the way the news business works, that is their capital, right? So all news outlets want to be the first, right? They want to be the first to report on a thing. And so Race Counts was an example of we hand selected specific reporters that we already had established relationships with, that were already looking at racial justice in government entities, and we wanted them to be the first to be able to tell this story.
Great. Yeah, and if folks have questions about that example, feel free to keep adding them to the chats, or we can come back to this. But I think it's just a great example of how you really want to sort of get clear on the goals and be clear on the strategy before you get to tactics, because the tactics flow out of that clarity once you really know what you're trying to achieve and how media will help you achieve your goals. So now let's talk about some of the things you can do sort of building a foundation. You know, these are evergreen activities that help it so that when you are ready to add some media and try to earn some media, that you're ready to go. And so one is just a simple task of sort of daily or weekly media monitoring. And what I mean by that is doing something like setting up simple Google alerts, or making a Twitter list of reporters on Twitter, or those are probably the two easiest ways to do it, where it's just, you know, on an ongoing way, you're kind of looking at who's writing about this issue, who's sort of getting all the space, all the airtime, right? And how could we either add to what they're offering or complement it? Do I see any openings? Like, what is happening in the news that I can tie in as a hook, which we'll talk about in a minute. But doing this in some sort of ongoing way just sort of helps you set a baseline for understanding the media landscape around your issue in your community. So as you do that, what you want to be thinking about is, okay, where are the reporters who either like are writing about this all the time, or seem to have a lot of influence, right, on topics of health or topics of, you know, medicated access, even more specifically? Who's writing about issues related to the opioid crisis or interventions? Who has written a really good piece before, so that shows that they understand your topic and you could probably trust them as a credible source to write about this. Reporters and journalists often have a beat. Now often they have multiple beats because of the way newsrooms are changing, but so often an outlet will have their health reporter. And so that might be the best journalist for you in your community, because they are looking for what are the trending health issues in Fresno County or whatever community you're in. And then as you start to identify those reporters, you can start to build a media list. And so this is just an example we pulled from a week of action that a lot of organizations from around California had last week, trying to advocate for additional revenue generation measures to address a just recovery from COVID here in California. And so you just see it's, you know, you list the publication, who is the journalist, and then how do you find them? Like, what is their email? Are they on Twitter? What do they write about? You might have some notes about when you reach out to them. But this is just made in a simple Google spreadsheet. Sometimes people put their media list into their regular database. Maybe you have a Salesforce database. You could do it there. Some folks use, other kinds of tools, but it can be just something simple that you're already comfortable with. That's a great place for you to collect all this. Then you can start to think about, now I have this list of reporters, how do I start to cultivate relationships with them? And, funnily enough, reporters at the end of the day are people. So part of how you might think about building those relationships with them is just reminding ourselves that relationships take time and that relationships are two-way. Often reporters feel like they are just constantly having a one-way fire hose of information being sent their way. So I have found that often they're really refreshed and excited when someone's like, hey, I want to hear more about you. What are you interested in? Why did you become a reporter? How did you end up at the Mercury News? Whatever those things are, right? But just treating it as a relationship rather than a transaction can really help. Also, you want to share their news. A lot of journalists, they want to be read. They want to know that people are reading their stuff. So even if it's not about you, but you see a reporter that you've been cultivating write a really good story that relates to your issues, you might lift it up and shout it out. Or you might even direct message them and thank them for an awesome story, right? Just in that ongoing cultivation. And Anna just chatted a great resource about thinking particularly in this moment, because we do want to name that, like many, 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 many people, journalists and reporters and media institutions are being deeply impacted during the pandemic. Folks are furloughed, folks have been laid off, newsrooms have been reduced. And so just because of that, right, there's sort of even more of the importance of sort of thinking of media as a long game where you're cultivating the relationships that can really benefit both you and the reporter. You also want to think about the people you have in your own team, right? And that you don't wait until the day that you have a media interview to think about training people to do an interview, so that it's something that lots of folks are ready for. It could be having a list of quotes ready on some topics, or sound bites or talking points that help people. But just all of these things are things that you can put into place in an evergreen way so that you can move really quickly when you get a call from the media or somebody responds to a pitch. So those are some of the things you can kind of do every day. And then now let's talk about when you've decided it's time to pitch the media because you have an event or some news or a story that you think would really help you achieve your goals.
Hey, Meredith, just before we jump in, I want to just offer folks the opportunity to ask questions. Like, as we move on to this next set of slides, like, please put your questions in the chat. Don't be shy, and we want to make sure that you're getting what you need from today.
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you. So Anna talked about earlier the idea of a hook. And a news or media hook is just simply like, what is the bait that a writer, reporter, producer is going to bite on, right? And so going back to that checklist can help you maybe identify potential hooks. But in order for things to be newsworthy, right, it needs to feel timely. Like, why is it the right story for a reporter to be writing in this moment? Why will it matter to their readers, right? Because the media is just a conduit to getting into the audience. So sort of explaining to the reporter why the people of your community need to know about this. And then other things, right? It needs to feel new or like a first, or like a new perspective on the story that hasn't been told before. But all of these things can be good hooks that you can build your pitch around. And so, here's just again to ask yourself, and here's some examples on the left of these are actual press releases that have been sent out. And I have had many organizations talk to me about, hey, we have a new website and we'd like to do a press release. Your new website is not news to almost anyone but yourself and the people who already love you, right? Or a lot of times there'll be like nonprofit organizational leaders come together for a meeting. And maybe you know that level of effort it took to get this coalition together and to like schedule the meeting, but like but folks aren't going to understand why that is you know, momentous. It doesn't mean that you might not pitch that meeting, but you need to do it in a way that's going to be a hook so that it seems like something timely and unique, and that it's going to be an impactful story. So in terms of the kinds of outlets, this can help you think a little bit about the different ways to decide who to include on your pitch list, right? So for example, with television, they're gonna bring a camera. What will the camera film? If you don't have an answer to that question, TV is probably not the best outlet for that particular hook. Think about with magazines. Magazines have to finalize their content months before it reaches the newsstand. So those might be for deeper, like human interest profiles, or that are going to have a longer lead time, right? You also don't want to forget about sort of trade or niche outlets. So that might be newspapers that, the general public doesn't know about, but everyone in the health world is going to read, right? And that those might be great ways to connect with the people that you need. And so then you want to think about what kind of materials might I need when I'm going to be pitching the media. And two of the most common ones are the press release and the media advisory. And a press release is a longer piece of content that itself is going to read like a third-person news story. And so that's where you might have some quotes and you might have some facts, and you want to make sure that it has a really catchy headline that both grabs people's attention, but that also that if all people read is the headline, they kind of understand what everything below it's going to be. And then on the right, an immediate advisory is usually more for an event or an action, sort of a one-time thing. And it's sort of like the who, what, where, and when. Very, very simple. But that can be used if you're having like a clinic opening, or you are having a rally in front of your city council meeting, right? But those are ways where you're inviting folks to come and tell the story of an event. I just wanted to say a minute about press events. So press events, meaning press conferences or press briefings or those types of things, often it's the first thing that people think about doing, but I will say that it is one of the things that takes the most time and capacity to pull off, and particularly in this moment, can be very hard to get press at. So there are things that, again, if your press event is going to be really, really newsworthy because of the kinds of speakers that you're going to have, or because you're announcing something and it's the first place anyone can hear about it at all. Like those types of things may make it worthwhile to pursue a press event, but that often there are other ways to get the coverage without having to sort of build it around an event.
Yeah, and I just wanted to flag what we mentioned earlier around thinking about the modus operandi of a media outlet, right? And so they want to feel like they're getting information that others aren't. And oftentimes at a press event, they're not going to be interested in sitting in a room, even if it's a virtual room, with a bunch of their competitors getting the information at the same time. So it's something to think about.
Great. So then you're ready to make the pitch because you have your materials, you know what you're doing, you have your list. So a pitch is simply the invitation to a reporter to write a story or to produce a story. And so you want to customize each email pitch. And the vast majority of reporters and writers say they prefer pitches by email. Although in the last 5 to 6 years, Twitter is becoming more and more effective and used using direct messages for very short pitches. And rather than writing one email that's like, to whom it may concern, and you BCC like all 72 people on your media list, that is a great way to end up in people's spam and or garbage files, right? And so even though it feels like it might be time saving, it actually isn't strategic. And so it's better to pitch fewer people, but with customized pitches where I'm saying, "Dear Anna, I love the story that you did about your kids going back to school. And that's why I think you'd be really interested to hear about what we're up to here in our community around supporting the health of families as they go back to school," right? Because I am going to respond more to an email that says, "Dear me, my name," than a "to whom it may concern." Your pitch should not be a novel. It should just be really short and easy to read. Journalists don't have a lot of time, and they're skimming and they're getting bombarded with pitches all day long. And so keep it short, keep it conversational, and make it very easy for them to clearly see the thing that might hook them and want them to do the story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want me to chime in? Okay. So I just want to reiterate some of the points we made earlier about, just empathizing with the role of a reporter. They got into this work because they see themselves as public servants just like us. And the pressure that they have is incredible, particularly with the economic situation we find ourselves in. Don't take it personally if they're short with you or grumpy, because they're under a lot of pressure. So not only are they getting pitched, but then they have to pitch, and they're getting assignments from their editors and they're in a pressure cooker situation. So as much as possible, like, just hold some empathy, and be polite and respectful. It is important in media relations to be persistent, but we don't want to be stalkers, right? So we want to be able to be really respectful of folks when they don't respond. Instead of following up with an email that says, "Hey, just wanted to follow up," offer something new. Offer an update or a development. And I'm sorry if I'm getting ahead, if we were going to do this on another slide in the coming up, but just try to offer, be a resource to them. And one thing I wanted to point out from a previous slide that we missed, which I have found is really, really important, is it's not enough to have a good story idea. You actually have to make sure that it's reportable. So what that means is you have to make sure that you have the data. You have the people who have lived experience that the reporter can speak to. You have to be able to verify. You have to help them do their job, right? It's not enough to be like, "Hey, you should really report on this." You actually have to give them a package and make it as easy as possible for them to do their job.
Great.
And there's some other notes here, but I just want to have an opportunity for folks to chat. Put in the chat, or even unmute yourself and speak up if you have tips on other ways you've been able to cultivate relationships with reporters. What's worked for you?
We'd love to invite folks to if you've had any successes or good tips, and while folks are thinking of that, just some of the things that journalists want, right, is like that can help you become that trusted go-to, is by being a trusted resource. Like, if you make it easy for them to work with you, and you're able to meet their deadlines, and you're, once they write the article, you're posting it everywhere and you're sharing it, all of that stuff is going to really make journalists excited. And things that often we hear they turn off is if they feel like you're over pitching them, being that pest, that you want to walk that lines between persistence and continuing to offer news and resources versus pestering of just "Hey, have you had a chance to read my email? Hey, have you had a chance to read my email?" And then also just make sure that your press materials and your pitch, don't have typos or mistakes, or, use the person's wrong name or any of those things, because that can just get even what could be a really good story to go straight into the garbage file. And And like Anna said, you know, that like keep just offering new things. And like we said, an exclusive can also be when you have really big news. An exclusive means you're letting an outlet know we're giving you this story and you're going to get to break it before anyone else. And so sometimes it can be really strategic to offer an exclusive, because then an outlet will be like, oh, cool, we want to say yes, because we're getting something none of our competitors will get. So in addition to sort of the reporter path of getting coverage, we also wanted to mention just the idea of editorial earned media. And that is the things that live in the editorial section of different outlets. So letters to the editor, which is actually one of the most read sections of most newspapers, but they're really short. But as you're doing media monitoring, if somebody gets the story wrong or you disagree with somebody, an op-ed can be a great way to get your analysis and thought leadership into your local community. An op-ed, which is included in sort of the same section, is a longer piece. It's usually about 750 words, and it's where you're creating an opinion on a topic. It can't be promotional of your organization. The opinion shouldn't be, you should all know about our organization. That probably will not get placed. But it may be a way to let people know about your organization by talking about why access to medicated treatment is so important for your community. We have heard that competition for op-ed placement is very up in the pandemic as people are sitting home writing op-eds. But it still can be a really great path to pursue. You need to offer your op-ed piece to one outlet at a time. You can't be like, okay, I'm gonna both ask the SF Chronicle and the Oakland Tribune, because if they find out, they won't publish it. They're only gonna be wanting to publish content that is original. And then lastly, that you can cultivate relationships with editorial boards and editors. And particularly if you're doing advocacy work, it can be a great way to get like the Sacramento Bee to come out in favor of the statewide legislation you're trying to pass, for example. And that they sort of help add to your echo chamber within the media. And then lastly, just to name that in the day and age that we live in, we can make our own media. I do not want to understress the amount of capacity that it can take to do these things well, but that if you have that capacity and creativity to do these things well, it can be a way to have more ownership and not to have to rely on earning your own media. So that could be, you know, a video series or an art series that you're promoting on one of your channels. The North Pole is like a TV web show that Movement Generation created to sort of do larger narrative change in support of their work around creating more equity and justice and protecting our environment. Blogs, lots of organizations have blogs. If you are not going to post on your blog at least once a week, you probably don't have the capacity to do a blog well, right? So you just want to ask yourself, do we have the people and the content and the capacity to be creating content so that people are actually coming to our blog, right? And then also podcasts or radio shows are a growing way that people are engaging with news and information. And Ella Baker Center, where I used to work, just launched a podcast earlier this year, right? But again, with all of these can be great ways to achieve what you want with the media, but you want to really think seriously about how you're going to make them happen.
And I just want to say, don't succumb to peer pressure. And make sure that when you are making your own media, it fits in the culture of your organization. Like what is you, right? Are you an organization that has a really strong voice, right? And so maybe a podcast is the right approach for you. Or, you know, do you have a really, you know, you have a really great photographer or a graphic designer. And so maybe, you know, more of the artistic stuff is for you. So just, you know, make sure that it fits with your capacity, as well as just what feeds you as an organization, like what you actually enjoy. You're more likely to keep something you enjoy up than something that feels like a task or a chore.
Yeah, and you're looking for the Venn diagram between like your culture and what you enjoy and what your audience will engage with, right? And so is your audience an audience that is gonna love art and is on YouTube already and or what have you, right? To make sure that it is a strategic use of your resources and your time. And so then just one, last case study, and then we'll open it up for questions and discussion. So here is an example where the Center for Youth Wellness that does work on adverse early childhood experiences, they were putting out a policy report. And, organization issues report is not a headline that you probably see in your local newspaper very often. And so they were looking for hooks to make sure that this could actually be a way to launch this larger conversation and really making it that across California, more people actually understood what even ACEs were. And so for this, they decided to host a summit where the event itself could be used as a hook to engage media to come, as well as partners from across the state that were working at the intersections around the issue. But then they also launched the report at the same time and tied it along, everything under this theme of children can thrive, with a hashtag online so that there were online conversations. And that through all of these different pieces, they got more than 50 media hits covering the summit, the report, or some combination of the two. And just to show again that your media doesn't live in a vacuum, but it should be woven into the larger goal, right? And this was sort of an awareness and conversational goal, and the audience of trying to get folks into the conversation. And then the tactics of getting media coverage, as well as having an event, as well as having an online engagement strategy. So with that, just because we're a little short on time and I don't want to have breakout groups that are so short they wouldn't be useful, we're a smaller group. So I think instead of doing small group breakouts, we can just have a big group conversation. And would love to hear what questions folks have, as well as what are your thoughts about how have you used media as part of your overall strategy? Have you had any wins, whether they're little small wins or big huge wins? And do you have any other tips or tools that you've used when bringing media into your work? So yeah, would love to open it up and hear what folks think.
Also an opportunity if you're stuck, if you want to do some earned media outreach, but you're stuck on something, you're in a good group, we can try to unstick you.
What's coming up for folks? Earlier, I know someone chatted a little bit about the concern about capacity, and I'd love to hear how do folks find capacity or make capacity for this kind of work in your own organizations? I know that's something that needs to be answered by each organization, but I think can really help folks think how to make the time and capacity for this. So I'd love to hear thoughts about that, as well as any other things that are coming up for folks. And I totally appreciate, thanks for saying that, Liz. If folks are just digesting and thinking about, that is fine too. One thing I'll mention as folks consider to continue to noodle is just that as you digest this information, and like we said, we'll be sending you this deck and some of the links for some other resources to use. A week from today, we'll have office hours. And just in case you haven't joined for one of those in the past, this is a drop-in. So Anna and I, and often one of our other colleagues, will be on the line from 11 to noon on August 20th. And it's a great place to come and show us your media list, or come and just ask any questions. Or folks have come and just listened in because they wanted to be in community with other folks wrestling with some of these questions. So, that is a great way to circle back, to help sort of apply some of these learnings and lessons to your own work. So, yeah.
I do want to just flag that Grace has a question here about, the capacity question and creating that social media calendar. And I'm glad you actually brought that up, because that's something I was trying to figure out how to fit in which is in this landscape where it seems like digital, social, and earned are kind of just blending together a lot more. Like, you know, the fact that we have this person in the White House who makes news on a tweet, right? Like, so I think it is really smart to be thinking about earned media in the broader context of all of your channels, including social media.
Yeah.
Grace, I can share a tool. Lightbox Collaborative provides a free evergreen social media calendar. We can include that in the follow-up as something to help with the calendaring piece.
Great. Yeah, and you know, the idea of an editorial calendar, though often folks use it for thinking about sort of their website and social media. If you do decide to do something like a blog or a podcast, it's also a place to sort of plan out like how you're going to tell the story over time. And I've actually seen folks use it to sort of also plan out sort of where might there be moments where they want to reach out to journalists or to check in with someone that they've talked to in the past. So yeah, we can share that. And definitely if folks are wanting some help sort of thinking about how to customize it for your own work, we can talk about it on office hours next week as well. I also saw Libby saying that they've had some success with local media, and also naming that you're rural. And so one thing I want to mention for folks who do work in more rural areas is that often it is easier to get coverage in local newspapers in those less crowded news markets. So it can often in California be easier to get stories placed in Bakersfield or Fresno or Merced than it might be in Los Angeles or San Francisco, just because those more rural and regional outlets aren't getting pitched as much. And a lot of people forget about them and think, they only think about the LA Times and the Sacramento Bee. And so that can often actually be a way to get more coverage, is by not forgetting about those outlets. Also, again, depending on who is in your audience, think about Spanish or other language media outlets. Often people forget to pitch them. In order to work with and pitch Spanish language media or other language media, you need to also make sure that you have spokespeople who can do the interviews in those languages, particularly if it's TV or radio. So that's just also part of your internal assessment, but that those kinds of outlets can be really informative, can be really strategic for pitching. And a great way when you are hyper-focused on a more local community, they'll be looking to their local news.
And don't forget to maximize, once you do get that hit, make sure you get lots of mileage out of it, right? So posting it on social media, putting it in your email newsletter, just like milk it because you earned it. So make sure you just keep circulating it as much as possible.
Yeah, I mean, like sometimes it can be great if you've gotten a really great story. You might make a print version of it that you send out with thank you letters to your donors, or just anything that you've earned. Think about now, how can I get it a little bit more shine with the people again that you need to achieve your goals? So that's a great flag.
I do want to make sure we give folks time to do our eval too.
Yeah. Should we move on to that? Do you want to explain it?
Yeah. So we've really enjoyed this series and working with all of you and hearing, about your struggles and your triumphs. And we want to hear from you. So we created this really short, that's actually, that link I just shared is the editorial calendar. But let me actually share the link to the evaluation. We want to hear what worked for you about this series, what didn't work, how can we improve, what are some things you're going to take with you, and how can what we offered help you do your job as you move into this next phase of work. I know that the MAT access points is sunsetting, so just helping you think about how do you continue to evolve and build your own internal capacity. So please just take a minute after we wrap up here. We will also, when we follow up with the links and the recording and the slides, we'll include the link to the survey again. But it really means a lot to us. We know you're really busy, but you know, we want to make sure that we're growing and we're improving. So, and we also want to hear, you know, what you're going to do. Like, how are you actually going to be using these tools, and how has it actually like served you? So just, you know, a plug for just giving us some of your time to give us some feedback.
Awesome. Yeah, we'd really appreciate it. And again, we may pester you again about the survey if you come to office hours next week and in our follow-up email, but we would love that. And like Anna said, it has been so wonderful to get to meet you all over the last 5 and 6 months as we've done this series, and hearing about some of the work that you're doing on the ground, the amazing services that you're offering to your communities. And so we're so grateful to have the opportunity to work with the Sierra Health Foundation and the center to do this series and support you all. We hope we'll see many of you a week from today at our final office hours. Feel free to continue to chat or email any questions. And with that, we'll turn it back to Nora to close us out.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Meredith and Anna. And just a reminder, the recording, the slides, the resources are all on the Matt Access Points website. So you can access all of the previous webinars, including this one there. I just have to convert the recording and add the resources up there. So that'll be up by the end of today. If you have questions, concerns, reach out, and I will be sending out an email with the link to join office hours for next week. So take these last 2 minutes, if possible, to do that quick survey. But otherwise, thank you all so much for joining us and participating on this webinar. And Meredith and Anna, thank you so much for leading and facilitating such an incredible series.
Thank you all. Have an amazing day.